All right, so we're going to be using chalk pastels. With the chalk pastels, it may actually work a little bit differently than we did with the color pencils. We're still working in color, but what we're going to be doing this time is instead of really starting with like white, like we have in the past, what we're going to do is we're going to start with sort of our base color. So, you know what, if this was, let's say, you know, the blue duck, or we were doing it in green or whatever it is like that, even in the brightest sections, we'll probably start with that base color first, and then we would lighten it and darken it with the pastels. And you're going to find they work a bit differently than our colored pencils. The colored pencils were like opaque, and you couldn't see through them. You could see through them, so like you could see the other layers, and we wanted to mix them together. This stuff is really sort of opaque. You can't see through it, so when you add a lighter color on top of it, it'll still kind of stay there. Now, these are the high quality pastels, and what does that mean? Well, they're a little bit softer. The more expensive, the softer they are. So there's a lot more pigment in it. They are very fragile, and if you drop them, they're just going to kind of explode into powder. So when you're working, try to just be careful. And they come in these little foam containers, like they're eggs. Try to put them back on the foam when you're not using them. Don't put them on the table and just knock them over. They fall over and they just disintegrate. I tried doing pastels a few years ago with one of my AP groups. Maybe they were the most careful group, and you know, not all of them, but one of the kids. And basically, you know, half the floor. It was before we changed the floor to the blue tile. It was white tile. Half the floor was like green, and it was like green for months. So please just take it easy and careful with the pastels as you're working. These are dry. Some of you might be used to the sort of oil ones. When you're working, there's going to be a ton of dust. And the biggest thing that we're trying to like kind of work on today is controlling all of that and not making a terrible mess. Now, there's no way to put this on the paper without getting a ton of dust. But if you start getting that dust all over the place, all over your background, and it's sort of like it's becoming like a menace or a plague all over, you're pressing down entirely too hard. You shouldn't be pulverizing this stuff into the paper. And then as I'm starting with this first sort of like, I guess, first base coat, I'm trying to carefully work out from like the center areas, work it into the grooves of the paper, and then work on my edges. When I work on my edges, I'm going to really try to be careful to not sort of spread it all over the place. So I'm carefully trying to stop at my outline and my trace as carefully as I can, using the edge of my finger, kind of work it around, and then get it in there. Now, once you've got your sort of base, everything looks filled in, we're going to have to get rid of it a little bit, so we'll spread out a little bit so you're not on top of one another and we're not infecting people. But what we are looking for is a pretty clean edge all the way around. And one of the things you can do to kind of even clean it up further is getting a clean finger. All right, and I just put it right on the edge and sort of dragging it on that edge. That'll kind of clean things up. And one of the things that I do to kind of, I guess, clean my fingers up quickly while I'm working, because sometimes you need a clean one, is have a little wet piece of paper towel over here that you can kind of clean off and get some of the dust off of your fingers. You'll find later on when you start blending the colors in together, that might be a little bit helpful. All right. So I've got my base color. The next color I'm going to use is going to be the sort of like mustard sort of orange. Now, I want to work this stuff in and blend it in together, and a little bit goes a long way. So the very first bit of that I'm going to put on, I'm not going to take the pastel out. I'm just going to even just rub my finger on it. All right? And I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that on my actual finger and then just start bringing it into my rubber duck. And this is going to help me sort of add that first light tone. Now, this is one way to kind of use it a little bit more controlled, and also, really, you don't need much to get this thing started. I'll work that in there, and you can see my sort of orange glow is starting to happen. You can see where there's some areas with a little bit more. I'll add a little bit more. Do the same. I've got a little bit of orange glow like underneath here, like the neck, going on in there. And again, I'm just wiping my hand on the pastel and just sort of adding a little bit of tone to that. And part of it, again, is just trying to not overdo it. I think the biggest thing that I want you guys to get with this is less is more. I'll work on the wing here. I want to kind of keep some of this. It's very subtle, the wing. Like we have an outline because we traced it, but if you look at the picture, it really doesn't stand out much. So I'm going to kind of pick in on the feather here and just kind of wipe a little bit and go in the same direction as that sort of feather is going. And again, work this in for my sort of starting to shade this guy. Now there's some spots I might need just a little bit more. This is the part where I'll come back in and I'll add right up in here. Right in here on the behind the head for the shadow and to the back. A little bit down, a little bit more down in here. And I'm just going to add a little dab of it. And the key to all this again is not creating a ton of dust. And now as you start working on it, you're going to find that there are like different levels of how hard you should be pressing. In the beginning, you're going to find that you really kind of have to press the pastel like into the paper. Try to get all that chalk dust into the grooves of the paper. But once you sort of set that base and now you're sort of just layering more and more dust on top of it, sometimes you're going to find that all you really kind of need to do is kind of just gently drag your finger over it. So most of what we're trying to do right now is just sort of develop a little bit more of control over there without letting this whole outside area get really, really messy and out of control. I'm going to come back up and sort of add a little more yellow. Tip here and in some of my brighter sections. And again, might want to clean your finger off. If you've been working with a darker tone and you go back to light, I would wipe your finger off with your sort of wet paper towel. I'll let it dry out a little bit before you start touching it, and then just work that base dust into it. We've got white and we have a slightly off-white color. So the next one down in the thing, add just a little bit, the very brightest sections. It's not that bright necessarily in the picture, but I just kind of want to bring that out a little bit. I'm going to put some a little bit there, and a little bit here to kind of make the wing stand up off of the body. And sort of work that into the yellow so it doesn't look like pure white. And part of the contours and the shape, it's a simple shape to the rubber duck. Part of the blending is kind of like following that simple shape with your finger and sort of accentuating it. I'm going to grab, there's one slightly darker orange. I'll pull these out for you when we work. I'm going to use a little bit of that in the darkest areas. Kind of at this point, since there's a lot of dust on the paper, I'll just kind of dab a little bit on there. And you'll find that a little bit goes a long way. Sometimes I switch over to a different finger that happens to have no pastel on it. I find that sometimes a clean finger is what you need, and sometimes even during this halfway through, I'll just get up and wash my hands and then kind of just start fresh. Because once you start going into color and then you jump back into another area, you end up making just a big old mess with the entire thing. I want to help get this wing to stand out just a little bit. I'm going to make a nice little bit of an edge between the wing and the body. A little bit of a highlight. This top part right over here. Go back and add a little bit more. And add just a little bit on the bottom part of that. And right over there, just to help that edge of the wing just gently stand out from the body. Blend that in slightly. Again, just trying to use my fingertips. And in all honesty, that would be all you need for the body. Made a little mistake. What to do with a little mistake? I wiped the dirty finger over a part that's supposed to be yellow. The kneaded erasers I gave you last time, and I can give you another one. Kneaded erasers are the best things for dusty kind of stuff. The reason being is they don't leave little pieces that you have to sort of wipe and blow away like anything else. I made a mistake up there. I'm just going to come back, wipe some of that dust off with the eraser, come back in, add some color, carefully blend it back in. All right. Next step, the beak. I'm going to grab red. I'm going to carefully get in there again. I'm not trying to make a ton of dust. Just trying to get a little bit of pastel over there. But this is going to be a spot where getting the finger in there to sort of blend it and make your clean edges is going to be really, really difficult. And regardless, though, through the rest of the duck, the best way to blend, I think, is with your finger. It's soft, it's smooth, and it has a little bit of oil on it, which is helpful for this. But for the areas that you can't blend on, we have these little sort of rubber tip brushes. They have different sort of tips on them. Some are flat, some are round, some are pointed. You know, everybody gets a preference after a while, but I honestly don't think it matters for what we're doing. I have really small ones. These are called color shapers, and truthfully, they're really just like a really tiny fingertip. Same sort of thing, sort of soft, pliable, and this gives us a chance to kind of get in to those hard to reach places and sort of use the pastel to kind of fill in. So once we start into the beak, this is where I'll hand out some of those color shapers. I don't think you should use them for big open spots like on the body, but for areas that are hard to reach, can't fit in, or can't get exactly, these are the tools that we're going to use. The color shapers they're expensive and they don't sell them everywhere, so just make sure that we don't lose them. Kind of work that stuff in just like I would with my little finger. And then you might have said again, like, well, there's some highlights and some white. If this was colored pencil, we would have started with the white highlights, but it's not. So how we're going to deal with that is, again, the pastel is sort of opaque. So I can kind of add white to this and kind of work it in a little bit. So I'm going to smudge a little bit of white pastel in on those spots. And then I'm going to take my color shaper. Since it has a lot of red on it already, I can kind of wipe some of that off with my little wet paper towel, get a little of that excess dust off of it, and then kind of carefully sort of paint that other little piece in. Now, regardless of whatever you're going to do, it's going to kind of start turning a little pink, and if you blend it too much, they'll sort of disappear. Well, for some of this, you're going to have to kind of work it in the first time and add a little extra in round two. So this is sort of like the base for my highlights. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more. Again, get a little too much extra on there like I just did. I'll blow it off. Use your kneaded eraser to kind of clean it up. And we'll play around cleaning this up in a second. Last bit, the eyeball. I'm going to use a black charcoal pencil. I do have some pastel pencils somewhere, and what I'll say is that black charcoal pencil is just about the same thing. It does the same job, especially for this. So, and I'm going to kind of carefully go in there. Should be able to cover up your yellow fairly easily. We'll start with that, just that black dot. You can grab our color shaper and sort of blend it in a little bit if it looks a little choppy or see a little texture in it. Same thing, we'll grab a little bit of the white, a little dab up top. Our shaper to blend it in. Want to get some finishing touches on it. This is where I get my kneaded eraser, stretch it out, pinch this thing out to a nice like crisp edge. Just take like my kneaded eraser and made like an edge with it, and you can kind of go around carefully and try to just clean up sort of like where you went out of the lines, taking it, wedging it to a clean sort of edge, just like I pinched like a little bit there, and go around and kind of shape the outside of this thing, get rid of all my excess stuff. Being successful on this pretty much means that your outside of your duck looks pretty clean. Edge that you've created is pretty crisp. You don't have yellow smudgies or dust all over the place. And we're going to keep it simple as far as how many colors we're going to use to start, only mainly because I want you guys to develop a little bit more control with the dust first. Even though it's a simple sort of duck, it took me about 10 minutes. It's a little harder than it looks. Couple little fix-ups and touch-ups here. And there's Rubber Ducky. So that's the yellow one. I'm going to do this one more time in blue, or at least set you up with the colors. But what I can tell you right now is we're going to set you up on the tables. I think that two of you should share a set. All right, so like if you're sitting by yourself, maybe you can just buddy up with someone else over there, or sit by someone else, so we can kind of share the materials. If you're going to do the blue one, everything is basically the same, except just the main colors for the body are a little bit different, and I'll go over those in a second. Questions?